The farmhouse stood at the edge of town, a lonely structure swallowed by cornfields and silence. The Johnson family had lived there for generations, the kind of people everyone in town knew by name, but never truly knew in detail. To outsiders, they were ordinary church on Sundays, farming during the week, kids playing in the yard during summer evenings. But to those who had lived in the town long enough, the Johnsons carried an air of pride, a stubborn streak that had earned them both respect and resentment. On the night it happened, the wind howled across the fields, rattling the shutters and bending the tall stalks. A storm was brewing, and the power lines sagged under the weight of the coming rain. In the farmhouse, lanterns glowed dimly as the family gathered inside, unaware that before morning came, nearly every light in their home would be extinguished. Officer Daniels was the first to arrive when the call came in. He had been sitting in his patrol car, sipping lukewarm coffee, when dispatch crackled with the report. A neighbor had seen something unusual, lights flickering, shadows moving inside the Johnson place, but no one answering when they called. Daniels was only 5 miles away. He turned his car toward the farm, his stomach heavy with unease. The road stretched endlessly, the fields swaying like dark waves under the moon. As his headlights cut through the night, the farmhouse came into view. It looked the same as always, tall and weathered, but something about it felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Daniels pulled up slowly, stepping out into the humid air. His boots crunched gravel, the sound too loud in the silence. He approached the front porch, his hand instinctively hovering near his holster. The door was ajar. That alone set his nerves on fire. In a town where everyone locked their doors at night, this was no mistake. He pushed gently, the hinges creaking. Inside, the air smelled metallic, heavy, and suffocating. His flashlight beam swept across the living room, where a lamp had been knocked to the floor. A family photo hung crooked on the wall, cracked through the glass. He called out, "Sheriff's Department," but the only answer was the low groan of the storm outside. He moved further in, his boots sticking faintly on the floorboards. That was when he saw it. A hand, pale and still, reaching out from behind the couch. Daniel's chest tightened. He stepped around slowly, and his light revealed the first body. Mrs. Johnson lay sprawled across the rug, her eyes wide open, her mouth frozen in silent terror. Her dress was soaked, her lifeless hand stretched as though she had tried to crawl away. His radio crackled as he called it in backup. Coroner, everyone, but he knew deep down that help was already too late. He moved from room to room, and with each door he opened, the horror deepened. The father in his chair, slumped forward as though he had tried to rise. The teenage boy in the kitchen, a knife still near his outstretched fingers. His attempt at defense ended before it began. 2 younger children lay in their beds, as if someone had smothered their cries before they could even rise. Everywhere Daniels turned, death waited. It wasn't random, it wasn't hurried, it was deliberate. Whoever had done this had moved through the house with precision, extinguishing each life one by one. And then he heard it, a sound so faint, he thought at first it was the storm whistling through a crack in the wall. But then it came again, a whimper, soft, broken, coming from upstairs. Daniels moved cautiously, his heart hammering. He stepped over creaking boards, following the sound to a small bedroom. At the end of the hall, the door was half shut. He pushed it open, and his light fell across the bed. There she was, a little girl, no more than 7 or 8, sitting upright with a stuffed bear clutched to her chest. Her eyes were wide, glassy and red from crying. She didn't scream when she saw him. She only stared, her body trembling, her face pale. "Emily," Daniels whispered, recognizing her from the school events he'd seen in town. The Johnsons' youngest, alive. She didn't answer, she didn't move, she just held the bear tighter, rocking slightly. Daniels crouched, lowering his weapon, and flashlight. "It's okay. You're safe now." But even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. The killer was gone. Yes, but safety was a word too fragile for what she had witnessed. He wrapped her in his arms, lifting her gently. She buried her face in his shoulder, and he could feel her tiny body shivering against him. By the time backup arrived, the house had become a crime scene swarming with deputies and investigators. Sheriff Carter arrived, his jaw set tight, his weathered face pale beneath the brim of his hat. He walked through each room in silence, then emerged, shaking his head. "All of," he asked quietly. Daniels nodded grimly. "All but her," he gestured to Emily, now wrapped in a blanket, and sitting on the porch steps. A medic crouched beside her. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. Why her? That was the question none of them could answer. Detective Laura Whitaker arrived from the county seat just before dawn, a woman with sharp eyes and a colder edge to her voice. She had seen crime scenes before, but even she paused as she walked through the Johnson house. The brutality was intimate, not rushed, not careless. It was the work of someone who wanted this family erased. She noticed the smallest details, the way certain items were left untouched, the button lying near the dresser upstairs, black and cracked, as though torn from a coat in a struggle. She bagged it herself, slipping it into evidence. When she stepped outside, the first pale light of morning was cutting across the fields. Emily sat quietly on the porch, her face blank, her eyes distant. Daniels hovered nearby, protective, almost paternal in his watchfulness. Whitaker crouched in front of Emily, lowering her voice. "Emily, my name's Laura. I'm here to help you. Do you remember what happened?" The girl didn't answer. She only clutched the bear tighter. Whitaker tried again. "Did you see someone? Anyone you didn't know?" Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. Her gaze drifted past Whitaker, toward the cornfields, swaying in the morning breeze. Whitaker stood slowly, exchanging a glance with Daniels. "She's not ready." Daniels nodded. "She'll talk when she trusts someone. Until then, all we can do is keep her safe." The sheriff approached, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Safe? Safe from what? Whoever did this walked away clean. No forced entry, no stolen valuables. This wasn't robbery, it was extermination." Whitaker's eyes hardened. "Which means they're not done until we know why." The farmhouse loomed behind them, its walls now stained with memories no one would ever erase. Inside lay silence, but outside the wind carried whispers across the fields, whispers of questions, with no answers, of shadows that still lingered unseen. Emily sat motionless, her small hands gripping the bear, until her knuckles turned white. In her mind, the echoes of that night replayed over and over. The footsteps in the hall, the door opening, the figure in the dark. She remembered more than she let on, but the words were trapped, locked deep inside her trembling chest. And as the sun rose higher, casting light across the blood-stained home, one truth settled heavy over the town. The Johnson family was gone, but their story was only beginning. The morning after the massacre, the small town was already alive with rumors. Word traveled faster than fact, and by sunrise the Johnson house was no longer just a crime scene. It was a legend in the making. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones. Children pressed their faces against windows as parents pulled them back, and the press vans from the city arrived like vultures, setting up cameras on the gravel road outside the cornfield. Detective Laura Whitaker stood at the edge of the property, her coat drawn tight against the morning chill. She had been up all night, piecing together fragments of evidence, but the picture was still fractured. The sheriff was inside, giving orders to deputies who looked pale and unsteady. Whitaker lit a cigarette, even though she was trying to quit, and let the smoke curl into the air. The house behind her was cordoned off with tape, but no line could hold back the weight of what had happened inside. Emily was staying at the sheriff's office for now under the watchful eye of Officer Daniels. The girl hadn't spoken a single word since she'd been carried out of that house,
though her eyes seemed to see everything. Daniels had set her up in the conference room with coloring books, trying to keep her distracted. She colored with fierce intensity, the crayons grinding against the paper. But when Daniels looked closer, he noticed something unsettling. She wasn't coloring flowers or houses like most kids were. She was drawing figures, dark, shadowy shapes, with faces that were scribbled out. "Emily," Daniels said gently, crouching beside her. "Who are these people?" She didn't answer. She pressed harder with the black crayon, until the paper nearly tore. Daniels sighed and placed a hand on the table, not too close to scare her. "It's okay, you don't have to talk yet. Just know you're safe here." But even as he said it, he remembered Whitaker's words. Safe was a fragile word. Whoever had done this had left Emily alive for a reason, and that reason gnawed at him. At the farmhouse, Whitaker moved carefully through the rooms again. She had a notebook filled with details, blood spatter directions, the angle of the wounds, the absence of forced entry. The Johnsons had known their killer, or at least they hadn't expected danger, until it was too late. She lingered over the father's body, replaying scenarios in her mind. He had been seated when struck. The teenage boy had been in the kitchen, reaching for a knife. The younger children had been in bed. It was efficient, methodical, but why spare the youngest? She bent down again at the foot of the stairs, where she'd noticed a faint scuff mark the night before. Kneeling, she examined it. In the light of day, a boot print, large, heavy, with a worn sole. Not the type of boot a farmer wore. It looked military, or at least tactical. She bagged a plaster cast of it, her mind already racing through possibilities. Sheriff Carter stepped into the room, his face drawn. "Town's going crazy," he muttered. "Phones won't stop ringing. Reporters want answers. Families want to know if they're safe." Whitaker rose, brushing dust from her knees. "They're not safe, not until we know why this happened. And right now we don't even have a suspect." The sheriff rubbed his temples. "Johnson had no enemies I ever heard. Paid his taxes, came to church, minded his land. Whole family was decent folks." "Everyone has secrets," Whitaker said flatly. "Even decent folks." Back at the station, Daniels sat across from Emily, watching her drawings pile up. Each one was darker than the last. Shadows with long arms, looming over smaller figures. Finally she drew a single image that made his breath catch. The farmhouse, crudely outlined, and inside it, tiny stick figures lying on the floor. One figure was drawn larger, standing over beside the figure she drew something else, a circle with a cross slashed through it. Daniels leaned closer. "Emily, what's this?" He pointed at the symbol. For the first time she lifted her eyes to meet his. They were wide, unblinking, and filled with something he couldn't name. Slowly she whispered one word, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Monster." It was the first thing she'd said since the massacre. Daniels felt a chill run through him. He excused himself, taking the drawing straight to Whitaker. When she saw it, her eyes narrowed. "A symbol," she said. "Circle with a cross slashed through it. Could be a gang marking, or something ritualistic." "Monster," Daniels repeated. "That's what she called it." Whitaker set the paper on the desk, staring at it, as though it might answer her question. Kids see things differently. Could mean a mask, or something she couldn't explain. She tapped the paper. "But this is deliberate. Whoever was in that house left an impression on her strong enough that she drew it. That means she saw." The sheriff joined them, frowning at the drawing. "I don't like the sound of this. Circle with a cross. I've seen something like that before." Whitaker's head snapped up. "Where?" Carter hesitated, then lowered his voice. 15 years ago there was a case 2 counties over. Family killed in their home. Brutal. Like this. Only one survivor. A boy. He swore it wasn't a man who did it, but a monster. Drew the same kind of symbol, over and over. Case went cold. Nobody caught. Silence settled heavy over the room. "So what are we dealing with?" Daniels asked quietly. Whitaker didn't answer. She folded the drawing and slipped it into her case file. "Whatever it is, it's not the first time." That night, Emily was moved to a foster family, under police protection, though Daniels insisted on personally driving her there. The foster parents lived just outside town, a kind couple with no children of their own. They greeted Emily gently, but she clung to Daniels' arm, unwilling to let go. He bent down and promised, I'll check on you tomorrow. You're not alone. She finally let him go, though her wide eyes followed him until he drove out of sight, back at his small apartment. Daniels poured himself a stiff drink, something he hadn't done in years. He kept seeing the house, the bodies, the little girl clutching her. He had been in law enforcement long enough to know that cases like this didn't just scar towns, they scarred people. He wasn't sure if Emily would ever recover. He wasn't sure if he would either. Across town, Whitaker was poring over old files. The sheriff had dug out a dusty box from storage. The case from 15 years ago. She flipped through photos that mirrored the Johnson scene too closely for coincidence. A farmhouse, a slaughter, a single child survivor, and crude drawings of the same symbol Emily had made. She leaned back in her chair, her jaw tightening. It's the same person, she muttered, or the same thing, at that same hour. Emily lay in bed at the foster home. The house was quiet, the couple asleep in the next room, but Emily's eyes were wide open. She clutched her bear to her chest, listening. Outside the window, the cornfields rustled in the wind. She shut her eyes, but the sound grew louder. A shadow passed across her window. She froze. Her small hand reached for the crayon she'd hidden under her pillow. On the sheet of paper beside her bed, she began to draw, her hand trembling. She drew the same symbol again, over and over, filling the page until it was black. And outside, in the darkness of the corn, something.
The city seemed to carry the weight of the massacre, as if everyone had heard, even if not everyone spoke of it. Newspapers ran the story under grim headlines, the photos of the Price family smiling in happier times, plastered across the front page with the words, 8 slain, child survives. Detectives Harris and Miller kept their heads down, pushing through the noise of speculation, conspiracy theories, and fear-mongering that began to brew in the community. None of it mattered if they didn't uncover the truth. At the precinct, Harris sat staring at the symbol that had been found smeared on the wall. The photograph glared back at him, a circle intersected by 3 jagged lines that looked deliberate, almost ceremonial. It wasn't gang-related graffiti, and it wasn't the kind of thing a random killer would waste time making. The fact that it had been drawn in the victim's blood meant whoever did this wanted it to be seen. He could almost imagine the killer's hands steady, methodical, after taking 8 lives, carefully pressing the lines into the wall as if sealing a message. He'd seen strange things in his career, but nothing that felt this heavy. The autopsy reports offered more disturbing details. The wounds inflicted on the victims weren't random. They weren't frenzied stabbings of someone panicking. They were precise. Each victim had been stabbed multiple times in areas designed to cause maximum suffering before death. Lungs, stomach, arteries, almost like someone practiced, maybe even trained. Miller leaned over Harris's desk, breaking the silence. You've been staring at that symbol for 2 hours. You find anything? Not yet, but it's not random. Someone wanted to say something here, and Clara's word, watched, isn't helping me sleep at night. Miller nodded, grim. She's still not talking. She hasn't said another word. Doctors think she's traumatized to the point of selective mutism, but she knows something. She saw something. Their conversation was interrupted by the chief, who strode into the office with a folder. Gentlemen, this case is about to get more complicated. That symbol, I had forensics run it through every database they could access. We've got a potential match to something from another state. 4 years ago, a family was slaughtered in Oregon. Same kind of brutal stabbings, and on their wall, almost identical symbol. Harris's heart sank, and the suspect, never caught. Case went cold after a year. No leads, no witnesses, no suspect. Just whispers about cult involvement. But if it's the same hand, then this isn't just about the prices, Harris muttered. The chief's tone was grave. Keep this quiet for now. No need to start a panic, but work fast. If we're dealing with someone who kills families, this won't be the last. That night, Harris went home, poured himself a glass of bourbon, and sat at his kitchen table,
staring at the photos of the crime scene. He couldn't shake Clara's face from his mind. Pale, hollow eyes staring into nothing, lips trembling when she whispered that one word. He thought of his own daughter, around Clara's age. The idea of her sitting among her murdered family, alive only by chance or design, was unbearable. Sleep didn't come easy, and when it did, it brought nightmare. Harris dreamed of the house on Alder Street, the walls dripping red, the symbol glowing faintly, as though alive, and a shadowed figure standing in the corner, watching, always watching. The next day, Miller met Harris with another piece of disturbing news. I pulled records on Daniel Price's business dealings. There's something strange. He took on a construction contract 6 months ago. Private investor, paid in cash. No paper trail. That same investor, connected to a dissolved company in Oregon. Guess when that company shut down? Right after the murders 4 years ago. Harris leaned forward. So Price was mixed up with someone shady. Maybe this wasn't random. Maybe the family was targeted. Could be. But why kill everyone? And why spare Clara? That question lingered, unanswered. Later that afternoon, Harris and Miller returned to the hospital to check on Clara again. She was awake, staring at the window as though watching something no one else could see. Harris sat gently on the chair beside her. Clara, I know it's hard, but if you can tell us anything at all, it might help us catch the man who hurt your family. For a long time, there was only silence. Then in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she said, he was here before. Miller's brows furrowed. Before? What do you mean, Clara? She looked at them with wide, trembling eyes. I saw him once, in the yard. Daddy told me not to be afraid. He said it was just a neighbor passing by, but it wasn't. He was watching us. Harris's skin prickled. Clara, can you tell me what he looked like? Her lips quivered. He had no eyes. Harris froze. He knew she was speaking through the lens of trauma. Maybe she meant his eyes were dark, shadowed, or hidden. But the way she said it, the certainty unsettled him. Afterward, Miller muttered, as they left the room, no eyes. That's creepy as hell. You think she's imagining it? Trauma can warp memory, but kids don't make stuff like that up out of nowhere. She saw something. Maybe he wore a mask. Maybe he was in shadow. Either way, she recognized him. By evening, Harris received another call, this one from the forensic lab. Detective, we pulled trace evidence from under one of the victim's fingernails. It's human skin. Whoever fought back scratched the killer. Do we have DNA? Harris asked eagerly. Yes, but no matches in the system. Whoever this is, they've never been caught before. That night, Harris drove back to Alder Street alone. The crime scene was still sealed, but he had clearance. He walked through the silent house, every step echoing. The smell of blood was faint, but still there, clinging to the wall. He paused at the living room, staring at the faint symbol that still marked the wall. For a moment, he imagined the killer standing where he stood, painting the symbol with blood as the bodies cooled, and then he heard it. A creak upstairs. He froze, hand instinctively reaching for his gun. The house was supposed to be empty. Slowly, carefully, he climbed the stairs. The hallway was dark, his flashlight beam cutting across closed doors. He moved toward the room at the end, the master bedroom, where Daniel and Melissa had been found. The door was ajar. He pushed it open, with the barrel of his gun, empty, but something caught his eye. The closet door slightly open. He approached, heart pounding, and yanked it open. Nothing, just clothes, shoes and shadows. He let out a breath, lowering his weapon. His nerves were frayed, but as he turned to leave, his light caught something new scratched into the inside of the closet wall. It hadn't been there before. The same symbol, fresh. His breath hitched, and he stumbled back. Someone had been in the house since the murder. Someone had been close enough to carve the mark again, as if mocking him. He left immediately, calling Miller. We've got a problem. He's coming back. He's not done. And as Harris drove away from Alder Street, he couldn't shake the feeling that eyes, real or not, were watching him from the darkness. The killer wasn't just taunting them. He was circling back. The Price family wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mess. And Harris had the sickening feeling that message hadn't fully been delivered yet. Rain fell in a steady drizzle the next morning, as if the entire city mourned with the weight of what was unraveling. Harris sat in his car, across from Alder Street, watching the crime scene tape flutter in the damp air. his fingers drumming against the steering wheel. He had barely slept, haunted by the fresh carving he'd discovered in the closet wall. Whoever their suspect was, he was brazen enough to come back to the scene of his own crime, taunting, daring the detectives to catch him. Miller arrived in his sedan, slamming the door shut with more force than necessary. He slid into Harris's car, tossing a folder onto the dashboard. Forensics confirmed it. That new carving in the closet, made with the same blade that killed the Prices. He's still carrying it. That bastard was standing in that house after we'd already swept it. Harris rubbed his temples. So he's mocking us, watching us. Miller shook his head. Or maybe this whole thing is some kind of ritual. I've been digging into those Oregon murders from 4 years ago. Same style of killings, same symbol. But get this, the victims weren't random. They were all families, parents, kids, wiped out in a single night. Every one of them. Harris turned sharply. You're saying he has a pattern? Not just a pattern, a purpose. He doesn't rob. He doesn't leave behind signs of forced entry. He goes after families, always families, and he leaves that mark like a signature. The thought was chilling. Harris flipped through the folder Miller had brought. The photos from Oregon were eerily similar. Blood-soaked rooms, wide-eyed corpses, and the symbol on the wall, crudely drawn yet deliberate. Harris's phone buzzed. It was the chief. He answered quickly. Harris, I just got a call from Child Protective Services. Clara had a nightmare last night. She was screaming, said he's here. He's here. They're asking for extra security at the hospital. Harris's grip tightened on the phone. Tell them I'll be there in 20 minutes. He drove through the wet streets, Miller beside him, both silent. When they arrived at the hospital, Clara's room was guarded by an officer. Harris entered quietly. The little girl sat curled in her bed, her small frame dwarfed by hospital sheets, eyes red from crying. Harris sat down gently. Clara, you're safe here. No one can hurt you. She shook her head vigorously. You don't understand. He doesn't need doors. He doesn't need windows. He just comes. The words sent a chill down Harris's spine. Miller crouched beside the bed, trying to soften his voice. Clara, can you tell us what he looks like? She hesitated, then whispered. Tall. Very tall. He wears black. His face, it's wrong, like he's wearing skin that doesn't belong to him. And his eyes are gone, just dark holes. Miller and Harris exchanged a glance. It was impossible not to feel unsettled by her vivid description. Trauma could create monsters in the mind. But what if she was describing a mask? Harris leaned closer. Clara, why do you think he didn't hurt you? Because he said I had to watch. The silence in the room was deafening. Harris felt the air thicken around him. Clara's words confirmed the worst. She had not just been spared, she had been chosen. That night Harris couldn't shake Clara's statement. He sat in his office surrounded by case files, staring at photographs of the symbol. He scribbled notes, circled connections, tried to make sense of what seemed senseless. Miller walked in carrying coffee. You're still at it? Miller asked, setting the cup down. Clara said he wanted her to watch. That's not random, Miller. That's intentional. He's sending a message. Miller sipped his coffee. To her, or to us, both, maybe. But here's what's bothering me. These families he's targeting, they aren't just random civilians. Price had shady business dealings. One of the Oregon victims, a real estate developer, with rumored ties to laundering money. What if this isn't just some psychotic thrill killer? What if he's punishing people? Miller frowned. A vigilante, a psychopath who thinks he's carrying out justice, or someone who believes in some twisted order. He kills the family to wipe the slate clean, but he leaves one survivor behind, someone to carry the memory, someone to bear the mark of what happened. Miller set his cup down hard. You're starting to sound like you believe this guy's got a plan from hell, don't you? Harris countered. The room was heavy with their unspoken fear. A call came through an hour later. Another murder, a family of 4, across the city. Harris and Miller rushed to the scene, sirens cutting through the night. When they arrived, the neighborhood was already cordoned off. The house looked disturbingly similar to Alder Street, an average suburban home, now crawling with police and flashing lights. Inside, the scene was a mirror image. The family stabbed to death, blood pooling into the carpet, the symbol smeared across the wall. Harris felt his stomach drop. He's escalating. He didn't even wait a week. Miller examined the bodies. It's the same. Precision wounds. Same blade. And look, he pointed to the youngest child's bedroom. The little girl, no older than 6, was alive, trembling under her bed, eyes wide with terror. She saw him. Harris whispered, The officers carried the child out, sobbing into a blanket. Harris followed. This wasn't random, this was a ritual. Later that night, Harris sat in his car outside the precinct, drenched from the rain. His hands trembled as he lit a cigarette, something he hadn't done in years. He thought about Clara, about the second little girl spared tonight. The killer was leaving witnesses, on purpose. Why? To torture them, to make them carriers of his message, or to show the world that no matter what the police did, he controlled the narrative. Inside the precinct, the chief addressed the team grimly. 2 massacres in less than a week, both with survivors. This is no longer a local case. We're contacting the FBI. Until then, no leaks to the press. The last thing we need is hysteria. Harris and Miller left the briefing in silence. Outside, Miller muttered, "What if the survivors aren't lucky? What if they're chosen?" "You ever think about that?" Harris exhaled slowly. "I'd been thinking about nothing else." Sleep was impossible. Harris returned to Alder Street once more, drawn as if by some invisible force. He stood in the living room staring at the fading blood-stained symbol, the silence pressing down on him, like a weight. He closed his eyes and tried to imagine the killer, the deliberate strikes, the calmness, the final act of leaving the mark, and then the chilling act of walking past a terrified child and sparing her. The house creaked, as if alive. Harris opened his eyes sharply. For a moment he swore he saw movement in the corner of the room, a figure tall cloaked in shadow, watching him. He spun, gun raised, but the corner was empty, just shadows. But Harris felt it deep in his bones. He wasn't alone. The killer wasn't just mocking them anymore. He was circling closer, and Clara's words echoed in his mind, like a curse. He doesn't need doors, he doesn't need windows, he just comes.
The rain refused to let up, blanketing the city in a grey wash that seemed to seep into every corner of Harris's mind. He had not slept for more than an hour at a time in days, every moment plagued by flashes of Clara's voice, the fresh blood on the walls of the second house, and the carved symbol that now seemed burned into his memory. He sat at his desk in the precinct, a stack of files open before him, the lamplight casting a dim glow across his tired face. Miller pushed through the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look like hell." Harris didn't even look up. "I feel worse." Miller dropped into the chair across from him and slid one of the cups across the desk. "FBI is flying in tomorrow. We've got less than 24 hours to pull everything we can together before they sweep in and take over." Harris nodded absently. "I've been reviewing every family-related homicide in the past 10 years. You know what I'm noticing? Every case like this, families wiped out, single survivor left behind, lines up in a perfect line, moving across the states. It's like he's traveling, picking a city, leaving his mark, then disappearing until the next one." Mueller leaned forward, a pattern, more like a pilgrimage. Every crime scene is near an old church or abandoned parish, not the big cathedrals, the forgotten ones, places no one visits anymore. I think he's tethering himself to them somehow. Miller frowned. "That sounds religious. Or sacrilegious," Harris muttered. "Whatever he's doing, it's deliberate. He doesn't just kill, he performs. The survivors, they're not mistakes, they're part of it." Before Miller could answer, the chief stepped in. "We just got a call. Someone broke into Alder Street again. Neighbors reported movement." Harris and Miller were on their feet instantly. The ride across town was suffocating. When they pulled up to the old Price house, officers already had the perimeter surrounded. The front door creaked open, under Harris's push, revealing a house that felt even darker than before. The air was heavy, as though soaked in memory. The living room was untouched, but as Harris moved toward the hallway leading to the closet, his chest tightened. The closet door was ajar. Slowly he reached out and opened it fully. The walls had changed again. The original carving still remained, but new words had been scratched beneath it, jagged and uneven. "She will remember." Harris's breath caught. "He's talking about Clara." Miller cursed under his breath. "He's taunting us, right under our noses." But Harris shook his head. "No, this isn't just about us. He's talking to her directly. He wants her to carry this." As they searched the rest of the house, They found more. Upstairs in the master bedroom, a fresh smear of blood painted the mirror. A single handprint, too small to belong to an adult. Miller's eyes widened. That's a child's handprint. The realization struck like a blade. Harris's pulse thundered. He brought Clara here, or the other girl. The chief ordered the house sealed again, but Harris barely heard him. All he could think about was Clara's terrified eyes, and her whispered words. He said I had to watch. By dawn, Harris and Miller were back at the hospital. Clara sat pale and shivering, clutching a stuffed animal. When Harris asked her gently if anyone had come into her room last night, she only stared at him with hollow eyes. Then she lifted her small hand, the same hand they had seen smeared on the mirror. The implication was devastating. The killer had been inside the hospital, inside Clara's room. No one had stopped him. Miller slammed his fist against the wall after they left. This is impossible. How the hell is he walking into guarded spaces without being seen? Harris whispered, because he doesn't care if he's seen. Maybe the ones who look at him can't describe. Maybe they forget. Or maybe they don't want to remember. Miller gave him a sharp look. You're starting to sound like Clara. But Harris wasn't joking. He couldn't shake the sense that this man, if he even was a man, was operating outside the normal bounds of their world. Every instinct Harris had told him he was dealing with something that didn't fit the profile of a conventional killer. That evening, they drove to the old parish Harris had marked on his map, the one closest to Alder Street. The church was decrepit, its windows broken, its doors rotting on rusted hinges. They stepped inside cautiously, flashlights cutting through the darkness. The smell of damp wood and mildew filled the air. The pews were shattered, the altar covered in dust, but behind it on the wall, Harris's flashlight caught something. The symbol, carved deep, larger than any they had seen before, and beneath it, names. Dozens of names, etched in crude letters. Harris ran his fingers over them slowly. Each name matched a family annihilation case, stretching back decades. The wall was a ledger. Miller whispered, "My God, he's been doing this for years." Harris's chest tightened. His eyes scanned the list until he reached the bottom. The final name had not yet been carved, but there was a space waiting for it. The Price family. And under it, another space, blank. Harris felt his stomach twist. He's not finished. The following night, Harris was awakened by a call. The second survivor, the 6-year-old girl from the other massacre, had gone missing from foster care. No sign of forced entry. She had simply vanished. Panic set in like ice water in Harris's veins. First Clara, now the other girl. He knew, with a sick certainty, that both children were being drawn into whatever nightmare ritual the killer was weaving. Harris and Miller drove through the night, following every lead, checking every abandoned building, but the city seemed to close in on them, swallowing their efforts in silence. At 3 a.m., Harris stood outside the Price house once more, staring at its looming silhouette. The rain had stopped, but the air felt heavier than ever. He stepped inside alone, Miller waiting outside. His footsteps echoed softly through the hollow halls. He moved toward the closet, heart hammering. The door was already open. Inside, the wall had changed again. This time, the words cut into the wood read, "Tomorrow the last will watch." Harris staggered back, his breath shallow. Tomorrow. He was planning something new, something final. And the children, Clara and the other girl, were at the center of it. Miller found him there, pale and shaking, and Harris could barely whisper the words. "We're running out of time. He's going to finish it tomorrow." Neither of them noticed, as they left the house, that a shadow moved silently across the upstairs window, tall, still, watching, waiting. The city awoke to the sound of sirens that never seemed to end. By morning, everyone in the precinct knew that something dreadful was about to unfold. Harris sat slouched over his desk, his head cradled in his hands, the echoes of the message carved in the closet pounding in his skull. "Tomorrow, the last will watch." He had read it over and over, until the words lost their meaning.
but the terror beneath them only grew sharp. Whoever this figure was, he had set the stage for something so terrible that Harris could feel it pressing down like a weight in his chest. Miller tossed a folder onto the desk. "The FBI boys just landed. They want us at the field office in an hour." His tone carried that edge Harris knew too well. Miller didn't trust outsiders, and neither did Harris. "They'll slow us down," Harris muttered. "They don't understand what we're dealing with." Miller sat across from him, rubbing his temples. "Then tell me, Harris, do you understand what we're dealing with? Because I sure as hell don't. A guy who butchers families like clockwork, leaves children alive, walks in and out of guarded hospitals like a ghost, and writes cryptic warnings on walls. He's not supposed to exist." Harris's jaw tightened. "He exists. And if he says tomorrow, then tomorrow something's going to happen. We don't have time for bureaucracy." Miller sighed and lit a cigarette, even though it was against the rules. The room filled with smoke, as the rain outside battered against the windows. "So what's the Harris pointed to the map on the wall, the pins connecting old churches to slaughtered families. "He's circling back, always to the churches, always near the forgotten parishes. If tomorrow is his finale, he'll bring the girls to the largest one, the parish on Hamilton Road. It's still standing, even though no one's gone there in 30 years. Miller exhaled slowly. "And what do we tell the feds? That we're chasing ghosts in a rotting church? Let them chase paperwork. We'll be..." By nightfall, Harris and Miller had driven out of the city, their headlights cutting through the endless rows of sagging houses and boarded-up windows. The Hamilton Road parish rose ahead of them like a corpse, its steeple leaning, its stained glass windows shattered, its doors changed. The place breathed a kind of dread that made the hair on the back of Harris's neck rise. They cut the chains with bolt cutters and stepped inside. The air was damp and foul, heavy with mold and something metallic that Harris could almost taste. Their flashlights swept across rotted pews and broken hymnals. The altar stood cracked but proud at the far end, and above it, scratched into the wall, the same accursed symbol stared back at them. But this time the symbol was complete. The jagged circle that had been half finished in other houses was now fully closed. Inside the circle, a cross tilted unnaturally to one side, and around it were marks, tallies. Harris stepped closer. Each tally matched a family. He counted 8. Miller whispered, 8 family, 8 massacres, and 2 survivors. Harris stared at the empty space beneath the tallies. "He isn't done." A faint sound echoed through the church then, a low shuffle like small feet against stone. Harris snapped his flashlight toward the sound, and there at the edge of the aisle stood Clara. Her dress was dirty, her hair tangled, but her eyes were wide open, and she didn't look afraid. She looked entranced. "Clara." Harris's voice cracked as he rushed forward, but she didn't move. Her little hands were clasped together as though she were praying, her gaze locked on the altar. Miller hissed, "Where the hell did she come from?" "She was under hospital guard." Before Harris could answer, another figure emerged from the shadows. The second girl. She looked the same, vacant-eyed, calm, as though drawn to this place by an invisible string. And then the air shifted. From behind the altar, a tall figure stepped into view. His face was hidden beneath a hood, his shoulders broad, his movements deliberate. Harris couldn't breathe. It was him. The man spoke, his voice deep and steady, echoing unnaturally in the cavernous space. "The last will watch, just as the first did." Harris drew his gun instantly, Miller doing the same. "Step away from the children," Harris barked, but the man didn't flinch. His voice remained calm, almost sermon-like. "You've seen the signs, you've traced the path, you know this is not chance. The blood must speak, and the eyes must bear witness." Harris felt a cold sweat on his neck. "Why the children? Why leave them alive?" The man tilted his head slightly, as though curious. "Because innocence must remember what the world will forget. Their eyes carry the truth through them. The circle remains unbroken." Clara's lips parted then, and she whispered something that made Harris's blood turn to ice. "He told me it's not killing, it's cleansing." Miller cursed under his breath, his gun trembling. "This is insane." Harris's brainwashing them. But Harris's instincts screamed that pulling the trigger wouldn't end this, that somehow it would only complete it. The man raised one hand slowly, and both girls walked to his side, as if pulled by invisible strings. "No." Harris lunged forward, but the ground beneath him seemed to shift. The floorboards groaned, and cracked as though rejecting him. The church itself seemed alive, pulsing with a rhythm that matched his heartbeat. The man's voice grew louder, reverberating through the wall. The final family waits. One will remain to remember. And then, like lightning, realization struck Harris. The next family wasn't some strangers. It was his. He staggered back, his breath ragged, flashes of his own home, his wife, his young son burning in his mind. "No," he whispered, "you won't touch them." The man lowered his hood slightly, revealing a sliver of his face, pale, expressionless, with eyes so black they reflected no light. "It is already written." Before Harris could fire, the candles along the altar burst into flame, casting the church in a hellish glow. The children stood perfectly still, eyes glazed, as though awaiting command. The man stepped backward into the shadows, and in an instant he was gone. The flames extinguished themselves, leaving the church in utter darkness. Harris's flashlight flickered wildly, catching only the terrified face of Miller. The children were gone too. They searched the parish until dawn, but there was nothing. No man, no children, no footprint. Only the symbol remained, carved into the wall, complete and glistening, as if freshly cut. Back at the precinct, the FBI stormed in, demanding answers. Harris could barely speak. His mind was consumed by the man's words, the certainty in his voice, the promise that his own family was next. Miller tried to cover for him, telling the agents they were chasing a cult, some organized ritual killings, but Harris knew it wasn't a cult. It was one man, or something wearing the skin of a man who had orchestrated this horror for decades. That night, Harris refused to go home. He sat in his car, outside his house, watching the lights in his son's bedroom flicker on and off as the boy moved about, blissfully unaware. Every shadow looked dangerous. Every sound felt like a warning. At 2 a.m., he finally dozed off in the driver's seat, only to wake with a start. His phone buzzed. A text message, no number attached. It read simply, "She will remember for you." He knew then that the killer had already been inside, and tomorrow, as promised, something would happen that would change everything.
The courtroom was filled with a hushed tension, the kind that pressed down on everyone like a suffocating weight. Reporters sat in the front rows with pens poised, waiting to capture every detail of the trial. Family members of the victims clutched tissues, their faces etched with grief, their eyes fixed on the man seated at the defense table. Mark Holloway looked different now. Gone was the frantic, disheveled figure from the night of his arrest. In his place sat a man in a neatly pressed suit, his hair combed, his expression unreadable. But no matter how polished his appearance, the shadow of his crimes clung to him like a second skin. The survivor, Emily, was not present in the courtroom that day. At just 8 years old, she had already endured more trauma than most people faced in a lifetime. The prosecution decided she would not be forced to testify in open court, though her recorded statement and the psychologist's testimony about her trauma would be presented. Protecting her was paramount. Still, her absence left a haunting void. The child who had lived through the nightmare was not there to see her family's story reach its conclusion. As the prosecutor rose, the room fell silent. He began methodically laying out the evidence, the financial records showing Holloway's mounting debts, the insurance policy taken out on the property, the threatening messages to the family's eldest son, and most damning of all, Emily's chilling account of hiding in the closet while the murders unfolded. Each piece of evidence was a nail driven deeper into Holloway's coffin. The defense tried to counter, suggesting that Holloway was being scapegoated, that the investigation had been sloppy, that the trauma of a child survivor couldn't be relied upon for accuracy. But the weight of the evidence was too great. The jury sat, grim-faced, their eyes moving between the photographs of the crime scene and the man accused of orchestrating it. Outside the courthouse, the case had gripped the nation. News outlets called it The Survivor's Story and The Massacre on Greenwood Lane. Documentaries were already in production, and strangers left flowers, toys, and handwritten notes outside the charred remains of the family's home. Emily's face, captured in a single haunting photograph of her clutching a stuffed rabbit as police carried her from the scene, had become a symbol of both unimaginable horror and fragile resilience. As the trial dragged on, new revelations emerged. Holloway had not only planned the murders, but had recruited 2 accomplices, men who believed they would be paid for their involvement. Both had already struck plea deals, their testimonies helping secure the case against Holloway in exchange for reduced sentences. One of them, during a particularly chilling moment of testimony, admitted he hadn't known a child was in the house until he heard a faint whimper. "I wanted to go back," he said, his voice breaking. "But Holloway told me to leave it," he said. "One won't matter. She won't survive anyway." That single statement shattered what little composure remained in the courtroom. Gasps and sobs echoed through the chamber. The image of Emily, small and terrified, left alone among the bodies of her family, was now seared into everyone's mind. When it came time for the verdict, the courtroom braced itself. The jury filed in, their faces pale, their expressions solemn. The foreman stood and delivered the words the families had long waited to hear. Guilty on all counts of first-degree murder. Guilty on all counts of conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty on charges of arson and attempted cover-up. The air seemed to crackle with relief and anguish all at once. Some family members wept openly. Others sat in stunned silence, as though justice, even when served, could never truly balance the scales. Holloway showed no reaction. He simply stared ahead, his jaw tight, his hands clasped in front of him. When the judge announced the sentence, life without the possibility of parole, there was no outburst, no dramatic collapse. Just a hollow silence that seemed to underscore the emptiness of the man's soul. For Emily, the verdict brought no real closure. She was placed with distant relatives, who lived several states away. People she had never met but who welcomed her with open arms. In the quiet of her new bedroom, decorated with soft colors and filled with toys meant to comfort her, she often woke screaming in the middle of the night. The memories came back in fragments, the sound of footsteps, the crack of gunfire, the smell of smoke. Her mother's voice screaming her name. Therapists assured her guardians that healing would be a long, difficult journey. Some scars would never fade. Years later, when Emily was a teenager, she granted a rare interview. By then her story had become legend, retold in countless books, television specials, and podcasts. But hearing her own words brought a rawness that no media retelling could capture. Sitting across from the interviewer, she spoke softly, her eyes distant. "I don't remember everything. Sometimes I think my mind won't let me. But I remember hiding in that closet. I remember thinking, if I stay quiet, maybe I'll disappear. And then, when the police opened the door, I thought they were part of the nightmare too. It took me a long time to believe I was really safe." The interviewer asked her why she thought she was spared. Emily hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. "I don't know," she admitted. "Sometimes I think it was a mistake. Sometimes I think maybe it was a kind of mercy. But I don't think I'll ever know for sure." Her words echoed the question that had haunted everyone from the beginning. Why her? Why had one child survived when 8 others were slaughtered? Was it luck, negligence, or some twisted calculation by the killers? The answer would never come, and perhaps it was better that way. Some mysteries only deepened the pain when solved. Emily went on to dedicate her life to helping other survivors of violence. She studied psychology, became an advocate for children in crisis, and spoke at events across the country about resilience, trauma, and hope. Every time she told her story, she carried the memory of her family with her, honoring them by refusing to let their lives be defined solely by their death. And yet, even as she built a new life, shadows remained. There were nights when she lay awake, listening to the silence of her room, convinced she could still hear faint footsteps outside her door. There were moments when she avoided closets altogether, the small enclosed spaces triggering the terror of that night. Healing was not a straight line, it was a winding, jagged path, marked by progress and setbacks, light and darkness.
The house where the massacre occurred was eventually torn down. In its place, a memorial garden was created, with a plaque listing the names of the victims. People visited from across the country, leaving flowers, candles, and notes. Some came out of respect, others came out of morbid curiosity. But for Emily, the garden was both a sanctuary and a reminder. She visited once, standing quietly before the plaque, her fingers tracing the letters of her family's names. She didn't stay long. The memories were too heavy, the silence too loud. The story of the girl, who survived when 8 others perished, became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of life, the depths of human cruelty, and the resilience of the human spirit. For many, it was just another true crime story, one among countless others. But for Emily, it was the foundation of her existence, the night that shaped everything that followed. As she grew older, Emily began writing her own account. Not for profit, not for fame, but for herself. She wanted to put the memories somewhere outside her mind, to give them shape and meaning. The book, published quietly, was not a bestseller, but those who read it described it as haunting and deeply moving. She ended it with words that seemed to capture the essence of her journey. I am not just the girl who was found alive. I am not just a survivor. I am what my family wanted me to be. Someone who lives, who remembers, and who refuses to let their story end with silence. And so, the story that began with unspeakable horror, ended with something resembling hope. The scars would never vanish, but they became part of a larger tapestry, one woven with threads of pain, love, resilience, and remembrance. The nightmare on Greenwood Lane would never be forgotten, but neither would the little girl who walked out of it alive. Thank you for watching The Crimson Truth, a house filled with silence, 8 lives brutally ended, and one fragile breath that refused to give up. Questions still remain. Why was she spared, and what secrets died with the other? If you believe this story deserves more answers, share your thoughts below. Was it fate, a warning, or something far more sinister? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Crimson Truth for more real stories that chill the soul and keep the mysteries alive. Until next time, stay vigilant, because sometimes the darkest truths hide behind the quietest doors.